Hi, and welcome to a recording of the presentation for a study of microplastics in Pike County waters. I'm Rachael Marks, the Watershed Specialist for Pike County Conservation District, and I'll be going through the presentation today. First, we're going to go ahead and look at an outline of this presentation. So first, we're going to talk about who Pike County Conservation District is and who I am. We're going to talk about what microplastics are in the first place. Then we're going to talk about the study that was done, the results, and then what we can do with that information. So Pike County Conservation District, or PCCD, is a division of county government, and our main mission is just the long-term protection and sustainable use of the resources here in Pike County. And we do that through a variety of avenues, partnership, education, such as programs like this, technical assistance in the field with landowners, planning, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So like I had said, our conservation district is a part of the government of Pike County, and we were established in 1956. Each county in Pennsylvania has a conservation district except for Philadelphia, and that was made possible through the conservation district law here in Pennsylvania. And again, we are going to focus on our soil, water, and other natural resource conservation. And we also focus on critical issues as they come up, such as invasive species, microplastics, and other issues as they come to light. So what I do as the watershed specialist is mostly watershed stewardship. And that includes some groundwater monitoring. We have a program in partnership with the United States Geological Survey, where we go and look at the height of the water table below ground each month to try to assess any patterns that may be occurring in our groundwater aquifers. We also have a surface water monitoring program, which is what I'm doing in the image on the left here. And that's where we go through a lot of the streams in Pike County and look at their health and their quality based on a couple of factors, such as the life that's found within the stream, chemistry, and the quality of the habitat. We also do a lot of education and outreach. So I do programs like this one, and we go to a lot of places in the community and talk to residents and just raise awareness and education for the residents of Pike County. And then we also do some landowner assistance. So sometimes I will help landowners who have specific issues with things like invasive species or pond management questions or any other questions related to our natural resources. So first and foremost, this presentation is focused on microplastics, but what is a microplastic? So this image here just shows a diagram demonstrating a variety of sizes. A microplastic is a small piece of plastic that's going to be 5 millimeters or less. So you're looking at that pencil eraser on the top right-hand corner. So anything the size of a pencil eraser or smaller would be considered a microplastic. Where are these microplastics coming from? Most commonly, you'll see microplastics are coming from the breakdown of larger pieces of plastic. So things like on the left there, you'll see plastic water jugs and stuff like that. Unfortunately, plastics like that do not biodegrade in the traditional sense. Typically, we think of things breaking down, being eaten by fungi, bacteria, and breaking down into their original components. However, plastic doesn't behave that way. So plastic will just continue to break down into smaller and smaller pieces, creating those microplastics that we're talking about here today. And again, they can come from a variety of sources. Like I had said, the larger plastic pieces, but also synthetic fibers. So things like fleece or polyester are synthetic and will create microplastic fibers. Microbeads used to be a big source of microplastics. They were commonly found in cosmetics several years ago and now are less of an issue these days, and we'll get into that a little bit later as to why. But because these plastics can be so small, even if there isn't a source of plastic breakdown nearby, they can travel through air and water. So as they get smaller and smaller, they can be picked up by rain. They can flow through a stream. They can actually be picked up by wind action, things like that. So they can travel a pretty good distance as well. What's the big deal about microplastics? That's a great question. So a lot of the information on microplastics is still coming to light as studies are being done. There are a lot of gaps in our understanding as to the effects on our ecosystems, on our bodies, and our environment. But one thing that we do know is that these are more and more widespread than that was initially recognized. And here on the left, this is a picture of a plankton. So I don't know if you have seen SpongeBob SquarePants, but this is a plankton, and they are one of the building blocks of our freshwater aquatic ecosystems. So they will be eaten by things like our stream benthic macroinvertebrates and a bunch of other creatures in the stream. And this is a picture of one of those plankton, and those green dots inside of it are microplastics. And one thing that this shows is just that in our environment, bioaccumulation can be an issue, and that these plastics are being ingested by animals. So bioaccumulation is a term that we use to describe how things like these microplastic pieces will accumulate up the food chain. So for example, like I had said, this plankton is here, and they are one of the building blocks of our aquatic food chains. So if this plankton contains these microplastic pieces and is eaten by something larger, like a stream insect, that stream insect will then contain these microplastics. And then that stream insect is eaten by a fish, which then contains these microplastics, and it goes up the food chain to a larger bird of prey or what have you. And another thing that's worth noting here is that the volume of these that are consumed. So a fish will need to eat a lot more stream insects, right? They'll eat like 100 stream insects. So they're accumulating more and more as we're going up the food chain as well. These plankton and other invertebrates are also known to be very sensitive to a lot of environmental disturbances, things like temperature change, sedimentation, and so on. But they're also sensitive to these microplastic pieces. So these microplastic pieces can cause some shifts in survival, and that can affect several generations of these plankton and macroinvertebrates. One of the other issues is that there is a potential to disrupt the predator-prey interactions that we would normally see in an ecosystem. And this is for a variety of reasons, but one of the most notable is that these plastic pieces sometimes are clear or black, but oftentimes they can also be colorful. And these little guys, they don't know that these plastics don't really contain any nutritional value for them. And they're eating these thinking that their stomach is full and they're getting a nutritional value, when in reality they are not. So that can cause some effects as well. And we would be remiss to talk about microplastics without talking about the effect on the climate. So climate change, if you're not already aware, is just the pattern by which our climate is changing due to a variety of factors, but greenhouse gases that we're going to mention here are one of the big factors. And that causes some fluctuation in our weather patterns long term, and in some other aspects of our climate and our ecosystems. So first and foremost, our greenhouse gases, like I said, are one of the major factors when we're talking about climate change, one of the major contributors. And plastics and other plastic goods, they are made of carbon, and they will directly just release greenhouse gases. So you'll see in this image here, there's like a bucket and a hanger. As those are broken down naturally, they are going to cause the release of some greenhouse gases. And As we go down towards the right here, we'll see the declining sea ice. So of course, that's a common thing that's mentioned when we talk about climate. But the ice has this property that we call albedo. And that's just basically a fancy word for ability to reflect light. So ice is very good at reflecting light, not absorbing any of that solar energy and just sending it back into the atmosphere. However, plastics don't have as high of a reflectivity as ice. So as these microplastics are transported either through wind or water action to the sea ice, it causes an increase in the amount of energy that's absorbed by the ice. So it's reducing the ability of the ice to reflect that solar energy, which causes it to absorb a little bit more and causes it to warm a little bit more and melt a little bit more than it would otherwise. We'll also see here on the bottom right, greenhouse gases being emitted from the plastosphere. So that's a new term for me, but essentially it's a new ecosystem that's been discovered to live on plastic waste. So it is a brand new, completely functional ecosystem, and it's basically what they would call a biofilm. So it's just a bunch of microbes and other microscopic organisms that are living on these plastic debris and also causing the release of greenhouse gases. Another issue that we see here that's contributing to climate change is increased soil respiration. So soil respiration is works similar to any other type of respiration. Like when we respire, we are releasing carbon, and the soil acts in the same way. So the microplastic pieces are interacting with the soil in such a way that is increasing the amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that are being released from the soil. And last but not least, we have our ocean, which of course is one of the main places that we think of when we're talking about microplastics and plastic waste. But the ocean has something called a carbon pump. And that is where carbon is pumped down deep into the ocean from the atmosphere. And the ocean then acts sort of as a carbon sink. However, the microplastics are interfering with that process and causing a disruption in that carbon pump, which means that more carbon is then left in the atmosphere instead of being stored down deep into the ocean. So this study that we did here in Pike County is based on previous studies. So first and foremost, there is a study that was done by Penn Environment. And Penn Environment is an environmental advocacy group here in Pennsylvania that does a lot of research on up-and-coming environmental issues. They had done a study in 2022 that was focused on EV or exceptional value and HQ or high quality waterways in Pennsylvania. Pike County is fortunate enough that almost every waterway in the county would be considered that exceptional value or high quality. So we reached out to help participate in that study in 2022, and we sent 2 stream samples to Penn Environment to be analyzed by their study. So we just went out and collected samples from 2 streams, sent them off, and they were analyzed by Penn Environment. Both of those streams ended up containing microplastics. So when we got those results back, it was pretty eye-opening, and we decided that we might want to continue that a little bit more in Pike County. I'll also say that there are other studies being done by other agencies as well. The United States Geological Survey and a bunch of other organizations are actively doing microplastic studies. There's one that's been done on the Delaware River as well that also found microplastics. Again, the study that we did here in Pike County was based on those previous projects that we mentioned. And like I said, we're really lucky that we have mostly exceptional value and high quality waterways. So when we got the results from the previous study, that was an eye-opener for both ourselves and some residents in Pike County. And we decided that it might be a good idea to broaden our scope here within the county and see more of what's going on a local level. So we opened up site suggestions to the residents of Pike County if they were curious on what's going on in the waterway in their backyard or somewhere else in their community. We wanted people to really start looking at their own waterways. And we were fortunate enough to get funding from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection through an environmental education grant and get funding to do this study. So after we opened up the site suggestions to the residents of Pike County, we went ahead and put them on a map here and added a couple of our own just to make it more of a county-wide study and distribute some of the sites around the county. We ended up with 10 total sites all throughout Pike County. So the process of the study was pretty straightforward. Again, this was more of an awareness type of study, and we weren't able to do any specific lab analysis on the types of plastic. But what we did was collect the water samples from those 10 sites. So we had 3 glass jars for each site, went into the stream, as you can see on the left, and I rinsed the jar 3 times in the stream to reduce any contamination that may have occurred through the manufacturing of those jars or what have you. And then collected the 3 jars per site. After that, we were fortunate enough to work with Lackawack Environmental Education Center and Wildlife Sanctuary, and we were able to use their lab to filter out our samples. So in this center picture, you'll see a vacuum filtration setup, and that basically forced the water through a very fine filter paper that would take a lot of the water and other stuff out and just leave behind the microplastic fragments on the paper. And then last but not least, we took that paper that was left behind and observed it under a dissecting microscope to see if there were microplastics left behind from the water sample. And this is just a video, time-lapse video just showing the process of the filtration. So as I'm talking about how we were filtering and leaving behind the samples, on the left here, you'll see what the filter paper looked like afterwards, after the filtration. And then on the right, you'll see an actual microplastic fiber from the study that we saw. So this is what we were looking at through the scope that was left behind after we filtered the samples. And that little string that the arrow is pointing to is actually a microplastic fragment. And we'll get into the results here now, which is the meat of the presentation. So as I had said, there were 3 samples per site, and there were 10 sites, which means a total of 30 samples were run using this method. We also used a presence-absence method of analysis. It's very simple but effective. So we looked at the sample filter paper and said, yes, there were microplastics found, or no, there were none found. And here's some more pictures as well as to what the microplastic fragments looked like under the microscope. And this is just a table showing the results a little bit more. So as we see here, the P stand for present and the A stand for absent or none detected. 6 of the total 30 samples ended up containing no microplastics. But at the end of the day, every site or every stream had at least 2 samples that contained plastic pieces. And most of those plastics that we saw were those fibers that we had shown in the previous pictures. So a little bit longer pieces instead of like small fragments that might be, circular or what have you. And it's worth noting here that We did do duplicates, so we took 3 samples at each site, and that's really important because if you see here in the sample 1 column, there are 2 samples that showed absent or there weren't containing any microplastics for their first sample. But as we go through into our duplicates, our second sample and our third sample, you'll see that we end up finding microplastics at every site. And that's why duplicates are important, because we would kind of be getting the wrong idea if we only took 1 sample and saw that there were no plastics detected at 2 of the creeks. And these are just some key points I wanted to discuss about the limitations of our study. Like I had said, there are definitely more things and further analysis that you can do with more funding. But this study specifically was just more of an awareness study to make us aware that microplastics are a local issue. So first and foremost, you'll see on the picture on the left that there are some brown pieces in there, and that's just some organic debris. So streams have a lot of sticks and leaf particles and everything like that in there. So that made it hard sometimes to see what was going on the filter paper once we got to the microscope. Another thing is that we were very cognizant of litter nearby, any of the stream sites. So of course, like I had mentioned earlier, microplastics being found could be a direct relation to litter right next to the stream. And we just wanted to make sure that we were paying attention as we were out there for any litter nearby as a potential source. And last but not least, safety was a big issue. So we ended up taking these samples in January of 2025. So the temperatures were pretty cold, and we did have to wear winter gear to be safe out in the field. And unfortunately, a lot of our winter gear does contain synthetic fibers that could shed microplastics. So that's just one note I wanted to make on some of our study issues. So we found that all of the streams that we tested contained microplastics. And what do we do with that information? So it might seem very doom and gloom, but one thing that I like to emphasize is that there are a lot of small and large things that we can do to make a difference. So you don't have to go too crazy if you don't have the ability to do so. But there are a lot of little things that we can do as well. And of course, the age-old saying, reduce, reuse, recycle, still rings true these days. So that's definitely something you want to keep in mind as you go through your life. And again, this study was an awareness study, but awareness is the first step to making a change. So again, I feel as if a lot of people, myself included, when we see stories in the news about microplastics or plastic debris, we always get that picture of the large gyres in the ocean full of plastic. But it is a local issue as well, and it can affect us on a local level. But that also means that we can make change at a local level, and it can be effective. So first and foremost, we always see one of the big issues as single-use plastics. So if you just take a moment and think if you've used a single-use plastic in the last week. I know I have, unfortunately, and nobody's perfect. And it's really hard to eliminate the use of single-use plastics in your life. But we can try, right? So we can curb or do our best to avoid using single-use plastics. We can try to buy products in glass or paper packaging. And if we do get items in a single-use packaging, for example, like a plastic grocery bag, you can try to recycle it. A lot of stores will take plastic grocery bags back to be recycled, or you can try to reuse that plastic grocery bag in your garbage bin or what have you, just to give it a little bit more life. And also, one of the big things you can do is to buy in bulk to reduce the overall packaging. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention swapping plastic goods for more sustainably made goods. So one good source of single-use plastic is the plastic cutlery that we all use, like at our barbecues or birthday parties or whatever. You can try to swap those for paper products or bamboo or wood, whatever is accessible to you. There are a lot of alternatives out there now, which is good to see as well. As I had mentioned, recycling is a big one. And again, eliminating plastic use is a lot harder than you think. Plastic is pretty much everywhere and it's not always recyclable. So like I had mentioned in the previous slide, some of our packaging, things are very often shrink wrapped in plastic. And that may or may not be recyclable depending on where you live and the resources you have available to you. So it's really important to know your plastic codes and your types, and that's the diagram you see here on the left. So that 1 through 7 types of plastic. But just because it has a recycling arrow on it doesn't mean it's going to be recycled. So one of the biggest things is to just make sure you're checking with your recycling company. I know a lot of companies will have the information either on their website or on the recycling cans if you have that. And they have a lot of details about what they will and won't take. And that's been a little eye-opening for even myself here. Things like they don't want your plastic recycling to be in a plastic bag in the container. They want it to be loose. There are a lot of different things that make it a little bit more difficult. And I know a lot of recycling companies maybe will only take type 1 and type 2 plastics. They won't take that 3 through 7. And one of the really big eye-openers was, I don't know if you have ever bought cherry tomatoes in those little clam shells, those little plastic shells. But even though that is a type 1 or type 2 plastic, a lot of companies still don't take those. So you want to be sure that you're reading the fine print, so to speak, on your recycling company or your county recycling. And just making sure that we are doing what they want us to do in that regard. A lot of places, if something goes in the recycling that's not supposed to be in there, it will contaminate the load and the load will be just discarded or put in the trash. So we want to make sure that we are following the instructions to a T from our recycling company. Reusable items are a big one. So they are becoming more and more accessible and more popular as time goes on, which is great to see. And I do want to make a note here that single-use plastics are often not designed to be used multiple times. So just be aware of that as you're going through. I know I have several friends who, if they have to use a single-use plastic bottle, will reuse it a couple times. Unfortunately, those aren't designed to be used in that way. They are designed to just be used once. So you just want to be sure you're also protecting yourself. And then I love reusable shopping bags for shopping. Of course, I do struggle with actually bringing them with me to the store, which is another issue, but you do want to try to do that as much as you can. And again, as I had mentioned, reusing the plastic bags if you do have to end up getting a plastic grocery bag for another purpose before disposal, if you can. And of course, reusable drink bottles. Those have become more and more popular and more accessible to people in the last several years. Of course, you do have to have access to a way to refill that water bottle. But those bottles are becoming cheaper. You can get them at Walmart for $10. They're very affordable nowadays, and they used to be a lot less popular earlier on. You can also try to use reusable cutlery and straws. So even that in the last several years has become more popular. They have little kits that have a spoon, fork, and knife you can throw in your lunchbox or in your purse. And the same with the straws. There are reusable straws that you can bring with you anywhere. Instead of using plastic cutlery somewhere, you can use a reusable straw. And one of the big ones that I hadn't really thought about, but is a game changer, are the plastic cutting boards and containers. So when I use my plastic cutting board, you'll see those lines on it from having used the knife on the cutting board, and that's actually shedding microplastics because it is a plastic cutting board. I'm not saying go ahead and throw out all of your plastic ware and your plastic cutting boards, but as it comes to the point where you're ready to replace those, maybe think about getting a bamboo cutting board or a wood cutting board. And as your plastic containers are being worn, perhaps a glass container might be a little bit of a better option there. Clothing is also a big issue. So, as I had said earlier, unfortunately, a lot of our clothes, like our winter gear, tend to be made out of synthetic fibers like our polyester. One of the ones that shocked me the most was our fleece. So, fleece is actually made of synthetic fibers as well. One of the big things that you can do is just try to avoid fast fashion if you can. So, our fast fashion is becoming more and more popular nowadays, and that's just referring to those very cheaply made clothes that are made of synthetic fibers and plastics and are not meant to last very long. Um, so that causes a lot of consumption of plastic. And one of the things that is a better option is trying to buy more durable clothing if you can. Something that's designed to be reused for a long time and have a long life. And try to buy fibers that are more natural organic fibers like cotton or wool instead of rayon and polyester. That can be really hard. And again, I'm not saying go home and throw out all your fleece jackets. Um, but if you do already have those things, just make sure that you are using them and giving them a long life. And thrift shopping is part of that as well. So just because the fleeces and the clothes made of those plastic or non-organic fibers, they've already been made and they're already here, right? So that's why I mean, don't go ahead and throw out your fleece jackets. They're already here, but what you can do to help make a difference is just use them and give them a long life, decrease that demand for those goods. Again, they're already here. Don't throw them away. Just try to use them and give them a long life. And last but not least, we'll talk about legislation and economics. So this is an issue. Microplastics and single-use plastics are an issue that we can actually do something about legislatively and economically. So the purchase of sustainable products creates more demand, right? I've seen a shift even in my lifetime of as people demand more sustainable, reusable products or sustainable packaging, those things are increasing in frequency. There are a lot of shops that are popping up that are refill stores. A lot of our even local businesses are bagging items in paper. Things like that can create a difference, right? As we create more demand for these sustainable goods, hopefully we're showing the larger companies that we want these sustainable products. We don't want these cheaply made, designed not to last items. And of course, legislation is a big one to reduce single-use plastics or plastics overall. There are a lot of states that have banned plastic grocery bags, and they've seen that be pretty effective. I know that unfortunately, plastic grocery bags are also very light and they travel pretty far if they get loose. So I've seen states have banned those, or they'll have you pay 15 cents per plastic bag and things like that, just to try to reduce those types of plastics. And one of the best examples of legislation being effective is the Microbead Free Waters Act of 2015. So that's one of the big reasons that we don't see microbeads as frequently in our environment. So in 2015, President Obama signed this into law, and it gave companies some time to eliminate microbeads from their products. And again, that was very common in cosmetics and things like that, and they weren't breaking down and they were ending up in the environment. So now there are products that have a similar microbead type structure within them, but it does actually break down. And that's been really effective. So in summary, all of the waterways that we tested in Pike County ended up containing microplastics. And that might sound bad, but it's not the end of the world. So like I had said, being aware is the first step in making a change. And that's why small projects like this one are really important on a local level. Um, you can make a difference in the things that you do. Even just a couple switches can help make some change on a local level. And even some larger options like legislation, keeping an eye out for those and supporting those can make a huge difference as well. And again, research is important and it's ongoing. So just keep informed as time goes on, as more of these studies continue to be completed, and see the full extent of the issue, and more ways that we can help, I'm sure, will also emerge with that as well. And there is our contact information. Again, my name is Rachael Marks. I'm the Watershed Specialist here for Pike County Conservation District. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out at our email or our phone number on the left. Thank you.